6:17 p.m. When we got back to the house, there was a strange car in the driveway. "Who's that, Dad?" Dad turned off the engine. "Must be the new sitter." "New sitter? What happened to Becky?" "I love Becky. She was nice and friendly and always let me have seconds for dessert." "She had to go back to college," my dad said. "I know you wish she was your full-time babysitter, but it turns out she has other career goals." "That stinks. Why tonight?" Dad sighed. "While we were getting Abby, Mom called to remind me that she has a client in town, and I'm supposed to join them for dinner." "But we just got a new dog." "Yeah, no kidding," said my dad. "Great timing, huh? I'm pretty sure your mother's not too happy with me right now." Whatever. I couldn't care less if Mom was mad at Dad. It was her fault that she was always busy. Meanwhile, I had a new dog and a new babysitter all on the same night. Suddenly, I got a nervous feeling in my stomach. When my dad checked his phone for the 99th time that day, I put the leash on Abby to go inside. I had to wake her up. She'd slept the whole way home, which was kind of amazing since I figured she'd be super excited about her new adventure. I guess she was kind of excited, though, because the minute we got in the house, she peed on the floor. "Well, well, well," said a voice I'd never heard before. "What have we here? Let's get that cleaned up." I looked up and saw a lady walking in from the kitchen with a mop, smiling down at my brand new dog. The lady was very tall, and she walked with a cane. Everything about her seemed kind of old, except her hair. She had long red hair. The lady looked at me. "Hello there," she said. "Are you the new babysitter?" She smiled, revealing a mouthful of jagged yellow teeth. Profile. Name, Mrs. Craig. Age, not sure I can count that high. Occupation, babysitter. Interests, not brushing her teeth, apparently. "I am indeed, young man, and you must be Jimmy." She seemed friendly enough, but I noticed she was looking at my blotch. Suddenly, I felt nervous. Before I could spit it out, my dad came through the front door. "Ah, Mrs. Craig," he said. "So nice to meet you. My wife mentioned you'd be here." "Mrs. Craig? What kind of name is that?" "I am indeed Mrs. Craig," she answered, running her hand through her hair. "And you must be Mr. Bishop. A real pleasure to meet you." As they shook hands, Mrs. Craig looked down at Abby. "I didn't realize a dog was part of the equation," she said. Abby looked up at the lady and yawned. "Oh, yes," said my dad. "Hopefully one of those spontaneous decisions, I'm afraid. Hopefully that's not a problem?" "Not at all," said the old lady, but I could tell by her eyes she was lying. My dad turned to me. "Jimmy, with Becky going back to college and me hopefully going back to work, we thought it might be a good time to get some more permanent help, someone who can take care of you after school and drive you and your sister to activities, that kind of thing. And since Mom and I need to go out to dinner tonight, we thought we'd get a head start on things." He nodded at Mrs. Craig. "Mom ended up calling Barnaby Bradford's bestest babysitters and asked Mr. Bradford for his most highly regarded employee, and he sent over Mrs. Craig. If everything works out tonight, she'll come back tomorrow afternoon while I'm in the city. Sound good?" Dad held out his hand for a high five, but I was too busy staring at Mrs. Craig. She gave me and my dad a warm smile, but when she looked at the dog, the smile disappeared. I looked at Abby. She wasn't yawning anymore. Now she was totally alert, staring back up at Mrs. Craig. A standoff. Uh-oh, I thought to myself. This can't be good. 6:42 p.m. When Misty got home from cheerleading practice, I was in my room, putting up a new Hank Barlow poster. She came upstairs, took one look at Abby, and started laughing. "What kind of ridiculous-looking dog is that?" Have I mentioned that Misty is a terrible, horrible person? "The best kind," I snapped, "the kind that needed to be rescued." Misty bent her face down to get a closer look. "Well, I guess she's so ugly she's cute." She petted Abby for a few seconds, then stared down at her hand. "Ew, dog fur!" she screamed and ran to the bathroom. Fact. Even though a brother and sister might have the same parents, it's still possible for them to be the two most opposite people who have ever lived. After scrubbing Abby's fur off her like it was chicken pox or something, Misty came back into my room and flopped down on my bed. "What's the deal with the new babysitter?" she said. "Mrs. Craig. What kind of name is that?" I nodded. "Beats me. Dad said that Becky went back to college." "Bummer," said Misty. "For you, I mean." Since Misty was 14, she didn't consider herself part of the whole babysitter situation, although she liked having one because it meant she could go out whenever she wanted and not have to watch me. "Gee, thanks," I said. "I'm already pretty sure that Abby and Mrs. Craig don't like each other." Misty rolled her eyes. "Whatever. I just hope Dad doesn't get that job." "That's a terrible thing to say," I said, but I secretly agreed with her. Having Dad home was awesome. Misty's phone buzzed. She read a text, laughed, and immediately texted back. "What was that?" I asked her. "Just friend stuff," she said. She said that to me all the time. Just friend stuff. Translation: stop being such a nosy little brother. Misty got up. "Okay, enough chitty-chat." She headed toward her room where she would spend the next 3 hours texting her friends, listening to music, and combing her hair. But 2 minutes later, she popped her head back in. "Oh, and by the way, your blotch is bigger." "Ah! My blotch!" It was my turn to freak out and run to the bathroom. I stared in the mirror. She was right. It was bigger, a lot bigger. My blotch had expanded like an inch on all sides. I remembered my dad had said it looked like Rhode Island, and when I looked up Rhode Island, I found out it was the smallest state in the country. Oh no, what if it kept growing until it went through all 50 states? What if it became California or Texas or Alaska by the time school started? I decided I might have to skip school this year. 7:09 p.m. When my mom finally got home a little after 7, I ran downstairs to show her my blotch and Abby. But Mrs. Craig was already waiting at the door, smiling brightly. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Craig," she said, all her jagged yellow teeth showing. "A pleasure to meet you," said my mom as they shook hands. Then she saw me waiting in the hall. "There he is," Mom said as she scooped me up in her arms. My parents were big on scooping. "Let me see this tiny little mark everyone's so worried about." She examined my face. "Oh, that's nothing." "It's not a mark, it's a blotch," I said. "And it's not nothing, Mom. It's horrible. And it's getting bigger. If you were home more instead of working all the time and going out to dinner with clients, you'd know that." "Don't you start with me," she said, kissing the tip of my nose. "We'll get some medicine to take care of it. At least you got a dog as part of the deal. Where is the little lady anyway?" I grabbed my mom's hand and took her to the closet, where Abby was snoozing on top of some shoes. As my mom bent down to pet her, Abby woke up, licked my mom's hand, and went back to sleep. "She is adorable," Mom said, "and so well behaved." "I know," I said. "She sleeps a lot. I hope she wants to play soon." "Oh, I'm sure she will." My mom stood up, took off her shoes, and sighed happily. "Taking off these heels is one of the best highlights of my day. Too bad I have to put them back on in 20 minutes. Is Misty home? And where's Dad? He's coming to this dinner with me whether he likes it or not." I tried not to look too grumpy. "I think he's taking a shower or something." "Don't you worry. We'll bring dessert back just for you," Mom said, knowing I was grumpy anyway. Facts. Moms are good at reading their kids' minds. "Chocolate coconut cake?" I asked. Mom smiled. "With double frosting." Another fact. Double frosting may be the 2 best words in the English language. "Okay," I said. I was just about to add, "Could you get a little extra piece for Abby?" when Dad came downstairs carrying my mom's favorite necklace. "This ought to impress your client," he said. "It's almost as beautiful as you are." My mom said, "as if one little compliment would make me forget that you got a dog without asking me." "How about 2 little compliments?" said my dad. "I missed you so much today." She kissed him and laughed. "Now you're getting somewhere." Mrs. Craig stared at the necklace. "That is truly magnificent," she said. "Such beautiful diamonds." "You're telling me," said my dad. "I bought it in a moment of madness, back when I thought I could afford it." Mrs. Craig's eyes were still on the necklace. "Well, you have terrific taste. It looks simply spectacular on your lovely wife." My mom blushed. "Well, gotta go," said my dad. "Remember, Jimmy. Only one episode of Stop Police tonight. I'll make sure, Mrs. Craig said before I could answer. Too much television is bad for you. Ugh. Double frosting wasn't going to be enough. Better make it triple. 7:47 p.m. Then a strange thing happened. After my parents left and it got darker out, Abby got a lot less tired and a lot more playful. It started when Erwin came over for dinner around 7:30. Abby sprang out of the closet, jumped up, and started kissing him all over his face. He's so hyper, Erwin said, trying to catch his breath. Holy moly! He's a she, I corrected him, wondering a little jealously why Abby hadn't yet welcomed me the same way. Here, girl, I said. Abby turned, then jumped on me and started kissing me while wagging her tail like crazy. I thought she was kind of lazy, but I guess not, I said, relieved. It turned out she was just getting warmed up. At dinner, after Abby finished her dog food, she picked up the bowl and ran all over the house with it. Mrs. Craig didn't like that at all. Stop that dog! Stop that dog! She kept yelling. Abby basically just laughed at her and kept going. It was awesome. Fact: in a contest between an adorable dog and an annoyed babysitter, it's pretty easy to know who to root for. Mrs. Craig started chasing Abby around with her cane in one hand and a big wooden spoon in the other. Abby turned around, grabbed the spoon out of Mrs. Craig's hand, and turned that into a toy too. Give me back my spoon, Mrs. Craig hollered. As if. Misty came out of her room. Jimmy, calm that dog down, she ordered. I'm trying to do my summer reading. By which she meant reading texts from her friends about what color lipstick they wanted to try next. Finally, Abby dropped the 2 kitchen utensils. Then she ran to the front door and started barking like crazy. I think she wants to go out, Erwin said. Wow, you're a genius, I told him. Well, you're the opposite of a genius, he told me back. I put the leash on Abby. My parents said we could take Abby out if we kept her in the yard the whole time. I called out to Mrs. Craig, who was doing dishes in the kitchen. Be back in a few minutes. Fine, she yelled back. I think she would have been happier if I said a few hours. The minute we got outside, Abby started pulling on the leash like crazy. Soon she was dragging me all over the yard. She's strong for her size, Erwin observed. I resisted the temptation to call him a genius again. Easy, Abby, I said. Slow down. Woof, she said back, which I think meant, I'm going to pretend I don't understand what you're asking me. She pulled harder. It was pretty dark by now, but we had the outside lights on, so I could see what she was pulling me toward. A small hole at the edge of the yard where some creature probably lived. Abby stuck her nose down the hole and started digging and barking. I felt really sorry for whatever creature was, for the creature down there. It was probably scared out of its wits. Or not. Because the creature turned out to be a groundhog, and all of a sudden it popped its head up and made this weird angry noise like, "Get off my property!" Well, Abby didn't like that. She didn't like that at all. She lunged forward and growled. And when she growled, I saw her fangs for the first time. Whoa. I always knew dogs had fangs, but these fangs were capital letter fangs. They were huge and sharp and serious. Practically Jonah Forrester fangs. The groundhog must have thought so too, because it went back down its hole in about half a second and never came back up. Abby kept growling, though. Abby, I said, that's enough. She finally put her fangs away, looked up at me and wagged her tail. Then she jumped up and gave me a huge kiss. We better go back inside, Erwin said. I think he was a little surprised by Abby's unpredictable behavior. He wasn't the only one. 8:19 p.m. Erwin and I played with Abby for another half hour. She still had tons of energy. Even though we'd gotten a bunch of dog toys from the shelter, she preferred playing with an empty milk container that she stole from the recycling bin. Fact: dogs like playing with non-toys more than toys. When Mrs. Craig tried to take the milk container away, out came Abby's fangs. This dog is insane, screamed Mrs. Craig. Erwin and I laughed. It's not funny, bellowed Mrs. Craig. She was wrong. Abby kept driving Mrs. Craig crazy until 9 o'clock, when Erwin's dad came to pick him up. Meanwhile, I was getting tired. My parents weren't home yet, and Abby was still running all over the house. I texted my dad. Abby is acting kind of hyper. What kind of dog is she? 5 minutes later, he texted me back. Home in 20 minutes. Make sure she doesn't break anything. Not helpful. I knocked on my sister's door. She opened it a crack. What do you want? Abby's being really weird. She slept all day, but now it's nighttime and she's got tons of energy. Plus, her fangs are huge. Misty rolled her eyes. What is wrong with you? Newsflash, dogs sleep a lot, and double newsflash, dogs have fangs. She shut her door with a slam. I played tug of war with Abby and the milk container in the TV room for a while more, until Mrs. Craig yelled from the kitchen, Jimmy, time to get ready for bed. I guess her new policy was to not be in any room that Abby was in. When I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, I looked in the mirror. I couldn't believe it. My facial blotch was smaller. It turned out playing with Abby while she made Mrs. Craig miserable was the best thing that could have happened to my blotch. A few minutes later, my parents got home, and I gobbled down my chocolate coconut cake in about 3 bites. As my parents talked to Mrs. Craig, she smiled at them as if everything was totally swell. We had a wonderful evening, she said, twirling her bright red hair. Your children are so well behaved, and that little dog is just adorable. Misty, who had come downstairs to watch TV in the other room, looked up at me and rolled her eyes. My mom asked me, Honey, did you and Erwin have a good time tonight? I was about to say that Mrs. Craig and Abby didn't get along, but then I got this bad feeling that my parents would blame the strange new dog instead of the sweet old lady. I didn't want to risk any bad feelings about Abby, not on the first day. Everything was great, I said, and we didn't watch TV the whole time. My mom pretended to faint. It's a miracle. My dad shook Mrs. Craig's hand. Well, so far so good, my dad told her. What do you say we give this a shot? I have to be back in the city for more interviews over the next few days. Would you mind coming in the afternoons for the rest of the week? Seriously? Misty yelled from the other room. Not for you, my mom said, for Jimmy. Mrs. Craig smiled at my parents. I'd be delighted, she said. In the meantime, I've made some breakfast treats for you to enjoy in the morning. They're in the fridge. I looked at Abby. She looked at me. I'm pretty sure we were both thinking the same thing. We better get used to looking at yellow teeth.